This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Mariette's on the move.
What?
Mariette's on the move.
Again?
Mariette's on the move.
If you're dreaming about moving to a new city to pursue the life of your dreams, this podcast is for you. Moving 18 times in 23 years to 5 of America's top cities, I know it's not easy to make those decisions alone. I help you develop the dream, the plan, and the move, even if we need to get scrappy to get you there. I'll be doing interviews, career and city spotlights, and sharing my crazy moving stories, tips, tricks, and scams to avoid. Traveling to explore your dreams has never been easier. Now let's get moving. Happy anniversary, Mariette's on the Move, the podcast. I realized that January 8th was my 1 year, and I reflect back on last year, and 2023 was a shit show. That's all I have to say. I was so excited to start this podcast because I felt like, I don't have any children, so this was a legacy that I could leave and I can serve my community. But in a sense, what it did was really teach me a lot about myself and kind of what I was willing to commit to versus what I was interested in. And I can tell you that last year I was interested in starting a podcast, and this year I'm committed, and they are two very, very different things. When I started the year off, this podcast, man, it just taught me what I didn't know about technology. I can tell you that I had so many challenges and issues, and my guests were so incredibly gracious and nice about what I was experiencing and how I couldn't get my act together. I remember specifically Ali Wensky, who is the author of The Art of Happy Moving. We decided we were going to do the episode in person. I went to her real estate office and we set up the conference room. And the night before I was at my parents' house in Chicago. I set up everything. I tested everything out. Like everything worked perfect. And then I went to go actually do all the things in her office and nothing would work. So we ended up going into separate rooms and doing it over Zoom. I mean, that's how ridiculous it was. I was mortified. I can't even tell you how embarrassed I was. And she was so lovely and so sweet. And after all of that, we ended up re-recording later in, probably a couple weeks later, just because it was not the best sounding. I definitely felt like I was just throwing questions at her. It wasn't natural. And I think in my head, I don't use the word perfectionist. I don't think that anyone is a perfectionist. I think that is a really tough word, and I can get into that at some point in the podcast. But for me, I just wanted it to be perfect. I wanted it to sound, well, I guess that does sound like perfectionism, but I wanted it to sound professional because I didn't want to do anything half-ass, right? I look at this podcast like this is my legacy. This is what I would teach children. If I had a kid in college or about to leave college, this is what I would teach them. This is how I would help them, plan smarter moves, and I would build a foundation for them. So, they knew that they could take what they were learning here, apply it through my Fred framework, which, I'll talk about in a second, and make the move. And when they got to wherever it was that they were dreaming about going to, they could actually thrive and be successful. Unlike what I did when I was in my 20s and 30s, was I just kind of threw spaghetti at the wall and hoped that it worked out. I didn't really do a ton of planning. It was very YOLO and, I'll figure it out because everything is figure outable in the words of Marie Forleo. So today in the episode, as we are hitting the first anniversary milestone, I'm recording this 2 days before. So this is Saturday night. I'm about to go out and meet my friends, Zach and Melissa from college. They're a lovely couple that I'm so glad that they live here. I wish I spent more time with them, which is one of the commitments that I'm making this year, is to reconnect with my friends and family that I haven't seen in a while, that are in the vicinity, that, I get to see because I live in an amazing city. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. But this is my 18th move in 24 years. to 5 of America's top cities. And in every city, I always felt like there was something missing. And I think that it's not missing from the city, it's missing from me. So, what I want to do is take you kind of on the journey that I've had in the last, 6 months, because about 6 months ago, I went back to Chicago. Initially, I went back to Chicago for a funeral. My cousin's child died, and it was just so tragic. And I brought my dogs, and they got very sick. I don't know if it was the food that we brought, because we brought it in a cooler, and we had to stay overnight somewhere. I don't know what it was, but one of my dogs, Emmy Lou, who I was so bonded with, she got very sick, and later that week she ended up passing away. And there was like one after another, just tragic events. I felt like I could not catch up on the year. And even though my 2 weeks in Chicago, that trip were just terrible. Um, I mean, well, I can't say that it was all terrible. Yes, the funeral was terrible. My dog's getting sick. And Carter, while we were there, he was chasing a rabbit in my dad's backyard, tore his ACL. And there's really nothing you can do about it in a dog, I guess. It's, I mean, I guess you could, if they're younger, do surgery, but he was too old to do that. So there was just all these things that happened. But what I loved about my trip in Chicago is that I got to reconnect with so many people that I didn't get to see, that I just missed, really. I mean, I really just, I'm so connected with and don't spend enough time FaceTiming with or calling. And so I looked at it, and I tried to move forward, and I told my boss, because I work a full-time job outside of this podcast, that I wanted to move back to Chicago, and I wanted to be closer to my friends and family. And that didn't turn out great. I think he was, kind of thinking that I should find another job if that was the case. Luckily, he didn't fire me or anything. I'm still gainfully employed. But I think, I look at why I wanted to go, and I took a step back, and I said, you know what, I'm going to do the Fred framework. And this is, obviously a shameless plug for the framework, but it really does work. So financially, so the way the framework works is, it's again called Fred. It's finances, robustness. So think physical and mental health, ecosystem. So where you're moving from and where you're moving to, and the things that it needs to have in the ecosystem in order for you to thrive, not just survive. And then if it gets you closer to your dreams. And I think the important part of this is you have to determine what those dreams are and how you want to feel fulfilled and feel joy in your daily living, because you can strive for a goal and hit it and still figure out once you hit it that you're not happy, right? So the journey that you take to get to that goal is where the enjoyment is. And if you're not enjoying that, then it's really difficult. So in my workbook, so if you go to my website and you sign up for my mailing list, I send you this 14-page workbook. So I physically made this workbook myself in Canva. I printed it out, and I started doing it myself. And what I realized was, while financially it would work, I had to start with my dream. Like, what did I really want? What did I think that, would make me feel fulfilled? What was that dream that I was going after? And to me, I love helping people. There is nothing that makes me happier than when someone tells me that they had kind of an aha moment going through, conversations with me about their move, or giving them a different perspective. There was a guy that I work with who was moving from Charlotte. And one of the things that people often don't realize is, like, you can hire movers and you can move yourself. And a lot of people will do the pod. There's all kinds of different things. And this year, in this season, we're going to talk all about all the things moving, right? Everything from pods to the boxes that you use to how to build a smart foundation. But just having that conversation with him about his options on, what they needed, because he was moving from Charlotte back to Chicago, and he had a ton of big stuff. He had a beautiful large house, and moving back to Chicago, he was moving into probably a similar size house, I imagine, but he has a baby and they wanted to make sure that when they got there, sometimes movers can take up to 6 weeks to get your stuff to you. And so they didn't want to wait that long, right? So I always call it the get there bag. Sometimes people have get there boxes where they put them in their car, and it's literally all the stuff you need when you get there if your movers aren't going to be there for a while, right? That's everything from many items of clothing to pots and pans and a shower curtain to put up when you're, need to shower and things like that. So, talking through his options with him, it just made me so happy because I got a Teams message from him a couple weeks later and was like, thank you so much for all your help. I believe he said I was a genius or something along those lines. But just that I gave them options that made it really easy for them to move with a baby and with their family, but be prepared when they got there. And that just made me so, so, so happy. And I realized my dream is really to coach people into the life that they want and make the move that they get there as stress-free as possible. I mean, moving is the number 2 stressor, only to divorce, they say. So there are all kinds of things that come with that. And that's why I start with your dreams, right? Because if you know what that why is and you know what that dream is and what you want your life to look like, when we go back to the beginning of Fred and look at the finances and look at, your robustness, are you physically strong enough to move boxes? Are you mentally in a good place where if something comes up, it's not going to totally derail you and knock you off your rocker, right? And then where you're moving to is just as important. I mean, I can take somebody through verbally processing what they enjoy. Like for me, in my ecosystem, I want to be within 10 minutes of a Pilates studio because I love Pilates. And given what my back has gone through in the last 9 months, I have to build my core back up in order to keep my back strong. And my mental strength. I was grieving. I'm still grieving. I lost my second dog on December 10th. And to go from having dogs for 12 years to a very, very quiet house, it's just heartbreaking. My brother moved to Tennessee. And so I was kind of grieving the loss of that. My boyfriend and I broke up. So I was grieving kind of the loss of that relationship. And I wasn't mentally strong 6 months ago. I'm gaining strength and I'm working with a therapist. I'm working with a life coach. Even though I am a life coach, I still think everybody needs a life coach in their life. But looking at the framework, like financially, if I sold my house, I would be in really great shape. I have a lot of equity built in here. I put, good amount of money down. But robustness wise, I was hitting a big old stop sign, right? So even just thinking about packing boxes and bringing them from the kitchen into my garage, which is typically where I have a staging area. So one of the things I recommend when you're moving is to, go by room and figure out what you don't need in that moment, right? So like Christmas just passed. I don't really need my Christmas stuff, right? So I take all that and I put it in the garage.
Have you heard of Monat or Modern Nature? I hadn't either before my friend Monica was raving about their skincare products that she's obsessed with. I took their hair quiz to find out which product line would be best for me since I just happen to be looking for new shampoo and conditioner, and I signed up for their VIP package that got me a little bit of everything to try out. Turns out they are the first anti-aging hair care line in the world, which I didn't even know was a thing, and their products are gluten-free, vegan, and Leaping Bunny certified, which means they're never tested on animals. Now I'm obsessed with their rich formulations that feature botanical extracts, essential oils, and other naturally based ingredients, and I want to share those products with you. I'll put the link in the show notes, or you can hit the faves page on my website. It's safe, EU approved, and clinically tested by third parties, so essentially, robustness approved. Now back to the show. Have you heard of Monat or Modern Nature? I hadn't either before my friend Monica was raving about their skincare products that she's obsessed with. I took their hair quiz to find out which product line would be best for me since I just happened to be looking for new shampoo and conditioner, and I signed up for their VIP package that got me a little bit of everything to try out. Turns out they are the first anti-aging hair care line in the world, which I didn't even know was a thing. And their products are gluten-free, vegan, and Leaping Bunny certified, which means they're never tested on animals. Now I'm obsessed with their rich formulations that feature botanical extracts, essential oils, and other naturally based ingredients, and I want to share those products with you. I'll put the link in the show notes, or you can hit the faves page on my website. It's safe, EU approved, and clinically tested by third parties, so essentially, robustness approved. Now back to the show.
The kitchen stuff. I'm not a baker, despite me wanting to bake and liking to bake. I just don't ever do it. So, I don't need a lot of the baking stuff that I have in my pantry that once a year gets touched, right? So I can pack all that stuff and pick up that box and put it in the garage. I'm not strong enough. I went to go plug in the Christmas tree the other day and I literally tweaked my back out, and I've been kind of not back to where I started, but at the end of April last year, I ruptured 3 discs in my back, and it took, all of at least 5 months between my brother moving in and helping me do day-to-day things to going to physical therapy, literally 3 or 4 times a week, to build it back up. And literally, I keep saying literally, my stepsister Jen always teases me about that because it's like my crutch word. I went to go plug in the Christmas tree and I tweaked my back out, and it's been bothering me for the last 2 weeks. So physically, I knew I wasn't strong enough to pack and move boxes, but mentally, yep, grieving. I mean, grieving is really hard. I never thought it would impact me the way that I did. I have a whole new appreciation for people that do, grieve for many, many years, whether it's the loss of a spouse or a parent, or in my case, it's a dog. It gets less intense every day. But I will say that, just being in the space where my dogs were, like, that makes me happy. But now I have a whole new appreciation for my home. I've made some changes. My dad and his wife, Kim, came down for right after Christmas, right after my birthday. My birthday was on the day after Christmas. I turned the big old 4-7, and I don't know, we put up some cabinets in my laundry room, and it went from being a gigantic junk drawer to a happy place for me. Like, it's clean and crisp and looks pretty, and I absolutely love it. I'll post a before and after on social so you can see it. But it was just a simple thing like that that turned my space into something that I really, really loved. And going from room to room to room and decluttering as if I was moving, but not necessarily moving just yet or putting my house on the market, has really given me a new appreciation for my home. And I'm glad I didn't put it on the market in December. So, going through the Fred framework, one of the things that I love about it is that you can apply it really to anything. It doesn't have to be just to a move, right? Your finances, your physical and mental strength around whatever this goal is that you have, the ecosystem and the peer network that you're surrounding yourself to either lift you up or knock you down. Like, those are important things. And what this means to you and why it's your dream all have to be factored into these major decisions that we're doing. And so I really do appreciate the fact that I have that framework to use. And, all of you can jump on my mailing list and download it yourself. If for whatever reason it doesn't come through, I just switched platforms. That's the other thing that I did last year. I switched all of my platforms that I was using. When I first started, this whole thing was going to be a digital course. And I started on a platform called Kajabi. I got a great deal on it because I had gone through Digital Course Academy with Amy Porterfield, who is one of my virtual business mentors. And then renewal time came up, and I still didn't have a digital course, and it's very expensive. So I was like, we got to come off that. So I redid my website. The podcast platform that I was using last year, I was doing it via Zoom, which isn't really good resolution. And this year I wanted to put the podcast on YouTube. My mom listens to the podcast, but she doesn't like to listen to things. She likes to watch things on YouTube. So that was a goal for me. And then I went to Podcast Movement, which, if you don't have a podcast and you are thinking about starting one, is the coolest conference. I already signed up for next year. It was such a cool opportunity to meet hosts to talk about what I love, because I've always loved podcasts, but I'm an OG. Like, I look at podcasts as audio only. But apparently the number one and number two way to find a podcast is through TikTok and YouTube. So who knew, right? But there are things that I did. So I jumped over to Riverside, which is actually awesome. Like, I love it. It transcribes everything for you. I can do these magic clips, which I'm going to take all of the episodes in season 2, and I'm going to put some clips out onto YouTube and TikTok and Instagram so you guys can see what the episodes were about. I mean, we did some really, really fun episodes. Some of my favorites were, I talked to my best friend Stacy about ADHD and if there's a correlation between moving a lot and ADHD, because I have ADHD, which, the root of it is inflammation in my body. So I am doing all kinds of measures this year to get the inflammation out. But is there a correlation? Like, in my head, yeah, there's a lot of spontaneous things that people do when they have ADHD, and then they have to take the consequences of those actions. So I've moved a ton and I've made some really dumb moves. One of the episodes I did was what to do if you move into a haunted house. My aunt's a psychic medium, and her and I have way too much fun when we're together. In fact, like, after we recorded, we probably talked for another hour and a half because she's just such a trip. I just love her. Her name's Jorianne, the coffee psychic. Huge shout out to her. I just saw her a couple weeks ago when she was in town. But just, things like that, it wasn't just around moving. It wasn't taping boxes and things like that. But I do want to get into some of that in this next season that we're doing, which kicks off with this podcast. I think that I learned a lot from doing the podcast last year. The first season that I did, like I said, it was just awful. If that's one you listen to and you haven't gone back and listened since, please, 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 please go back and listen. Like, this isn't, it was like trial by fire. I learned a lot on the fly, and this moving forward is so much better. I'm having so much more fun now. I'm not scripting everything out. I very rarely even have questions. I literally am present in the conversation, and my natural curiosity takes over, and I'm finding that it's so much more enjoyable for the listener. So I hope you enjoy it. But what I would have done differently is I probably, and this is for the people that want to start a podcast but haven't done it yet. One I would absolutely recommend, like I was saying, Podcast Movement is an awesome, it's the largest podcasting conference. You learn everything from technical abilities and skills. They have all these different tracks to, like, marketing and advertising and monetizing. And I just met some of the coolest people there that I'm still in touch with. I've guested on a bunch of their podcasts in this last year, which has been super cool. Everything from my friend Whitney that I met there. She has a podcast called The Selfish Griever. And at the time, I needed it. It's about parents who lose their children. And I needed it because Emmy, Lou, and Carter were kind of my kids. They were my kids. I don't have kids. So I was on her podcast talking about, what to do when you lose a child. Should you move right away? And I think what, we talked about, I think will surprise you. I met Rogue Media. I met Mike Hamilton from Rogue Media, who I'm so grateful to have in my life now. He is the producer of the podcast now. So the network picked me up. I am part of the Rogue Media family. I'm going out to Waco, Texas, which is where they're based. And we're going to do, we're calling it the Rogue Block Party. I cannot wait to meet and see Mike again in person, because during the whole podcast movement, they had all these like meetups set up where you can kind of talk through some things. And I had so many conversations, and he happened to go to almost all of the same ones that I was in, and just gave such good wisdom and such good guidance, and just helped me really kind of change how I was looking at how I was doing this podcast, quite frankly. And now I get to meet, Matthew, who is, their social media person. And I'm just so excited to meet the rest of his crew in person, because I've just had such a great experience working with them. And I'm so, so, so grateful that they picked up my podcast, because I just think it's just going to explode, especially with some of the stuff that I have planned for this year. But in hindsight, what I would have done instead of starting the podcast on my own from scratch, I would have gone to Podcast Movement. I would have So I joined Podcast Collaborative, and if you go to my website, there is a favorites page, and on the favorites page is a link to get to the Podcast Collaborative. But it's a virtual networking group for podcasters, and you can sign up as a host or you can sign up as a guest or both, which I'm obviously signed up as both. And they do virtual mixers where you can meet all kinds of different people. It's all kinds of different times of the week. They have them a couple times a month. So I have met some really cool people. I've had some of them on as my guests. I've been on their podcasts, but in a sense, I would have done all of the guesting to figure out what platforms I wanted to use instead of, kind of trying a bunch of different ones and wasting money. I would have built a social media following prior to actually starting my own so I could, bring this into light and, have a lot of downloads, because the way sponsors sponsor you and pay you to do their commercials and such is through downloads. How many people is this going to get out to? And right now, my numbers, in my opinion, are pretty low for how many people move a year. I mean, there's like 11 million people move a year. So we're not even skimming the surface yet. And I would have done those things and built up my email list and launched a digital course, all of these things that I would have done prior to launching the podcast. So when I launched the podcast, I had more feedback around what people wanted to hear. I had more stories, more people to meet, more guest appearances to upload onto my podcasting platform when I was ready. So there's a lot of things I would have done differently, but I think the important thing is that I had been thinking about doing a podcast for years, and I started. I finally just did it, right? It wasn't perfect. In fact, it was really wonky and terrible, and I was so embarrassed. Like I kind of hope that at one point I can just drop off season 1 and it just goes away and nobody talks about it, and I just re-interview all those people now that I'm a little bit more comfortable with it. But I don't know. I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I just have to rip the Band-Aid off and do it. And that's what I did. So I can say with full confidence that, public speaking is something that I'm getting back into. I hope to get out to college campuses and teach our juniors and seniors what to do when they get out of school. I mean, I think that to me is a tremendous legacy to leave. I think that I made a lot of moves in my earlier 20s, and I had no one to talk to about what it was like. I didn't have a mentor, a moving mentor, which is what I am now, which I love that title. I get to talk to people about how to get ready for their move. I mean, if you make $100,000 in San Francisco, it's much different than you making $100,000 in Wichita, Kansas, right? So depending on where you're wanting to move, like what kind of jobs you take and how that, money and that salary is going to reflect it. So one of the people I'm going to have on the podcast is a guy named Caleb who owns a staffing firm. He's my one of my best friend's husbands. I've known them. I was their maid of honor in their wedding. So he is an amazing negotiator. He's been negotiating contracts for executives for many years now with his own staffing firm. So I'm going to have him on the podcast. I talked a little bit earlier today about how just making my laundry room made me happy and brought me more joy, because every time I would walk in there, I hated it. I'm a certified professional organizer, and I just do it really for friends and family. But that was my junk drawer. It was terrible. It was awful. And now I made it into a wonderful space. And I'm going to have an amazing woman named Gala on the podcast in a couple of weeks, actually. And she is a holistic home designer. And she does some really cool things. She's worked with Goop. She's worked with Ralph Lauren. So I'm excited to bring some of these people forward. I have Kara Taylor, who is she is a dream coach, literally, like that's her job. And she's just amazing. She's in my accountability pod. I meet with 4 women every Sunday morning, and we just kind of coach each other along and help each other with different things within our businesses. I'm going to have Natalie Luke on again. She's in my accountability pod. She wrote a book called Unsealing You, and it's basically about leveling up your career. And she wrote a book. She now is launching a digital course, which is amazing. I've gotten to see a preview of some of it. So I think that the people that I'm going to be bringing you this year in 2024 are people that not only I value having in my life, but I'm so excited to help you look at how you move differently. I think people are surprised when I tell somebody not to move or that it's not the right time because, I'm a relocation coach, I'm a moving mentor, and I think everybody thinks that I'm just going to say like, "No, rip the band-aid off and do it." But that's not realistic. Moving is so expensive and taxing physically, mentally. I mean, I talked to a guy, oh gosh, this was probably 6 months ago, and we were um, literally like at what was it, musical bingo with a bunch of friends, and he was considering moving to Charlotte and didn't know where he wanted to move, so he was going to try out a couple different places. And I talked to him about doing a city POC. And so a city POC is a proof of concept, and the principle behind it is to go and stay in that city longer than 5 days and really see if you like it. Well, he worked remote, so he didn't have to it didn't matter if he moved to, Denver, North Carolina and spent a month there in an Airbnb or in a furnished finder, apartment. He could do that and he could really test it out. And one of the conversation, part of the conversation we had was just, why would you sell your home in Michigan before you knew if you really, really wanted to move there? Right. So he was going to set up 3 different months worth of 3 different places to stay and try it out. And I'm a huge proponent of the try before you buy. Again, that's kind of why my advice to somebody starting a podcast is guest hosting, not hosting, guesting on podcasts to try it out to see if you really like it. You could be a guest your entire life and just do that. You don't have to start your own podcast. You can literally just be a guest on a million people's podcasts. So I think that this year I want to bring you some things that have inspired me, have helped me, have kept me in my home here in North Carolina. I'm going to revisit whether I want to move in another couple months again. I may just keep this place and rent it out. I don't know. But I think that it's important for you to understand that I want to take the stress off you in moving. I want to relieve you of that burden of thinking you're in the wrong place when really it might be a few tweaks to keep you in the right place. And I think it's going to be a really fun year. If you're watching this, I am on YouTube now. If you just search Marriett's on the Move podcast, I come up. We haven't really like officially launched. I think there's only like 11 or 12 people that are subscribed, and it's probably my family. But I am super excited to get it out there. I don't know. I think it's just going to be really cool. We're going to do a bunch of things. I'm going to be doing some keynotes this year, which I'm excited about. I'm releasing a signature scent candle when I do my Silk and Sonder journal. Here, I'll show it to you. If you're on the YouTube, you can see it. So this was January's. Silk and Sonder is a planner / journal. It's got all kinds of cool activities on it. There's a whole community that you get when you sign up for it. As an annual member, you get one a month. So every single month has a different theme. And I'm a big proponent of the 12-week year. I'm in that mastermind right now where you get more done in 12 weeks than you would in a whole year. So I use my Silk and Sonder planner. I light a candle. I make it a ritual. I fill out all the things that I want to do and aspire to in that year, or in that month, I mean. And this month is ambition. And I think it's going to be a pretty ambitious year. My dream is to get on the Today Show or Good Morning America, or both. I love both of them. I just have some big dreams that I want to fulfill so I can get this message out to as many people as possible. So if you think you can help me get there, I would love you to DM me or email me, and let's make it happen. So thank you so much for listening this past year. If you're a new listener, please subscribe. Please leave a review. That's how, Apple and Spotify put the algorithm in front of you. Watch on YouTube. Check me out on TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn. I feel like I'm everywhere all at once. So thank you so much for listening. Thanks for supporting me and being my friend. All of the stuff I talk about on the podcast is on my website under my favorites page. If you want to financially support the podcast, there is a link for Buy Me a Coffee. You can become a member. I can give you a shout out on air. I'm going to be doing a moving playlist on like a playlist for movers on our YouTube page. So I'm going to be putting that out to movers very soon. I'm also going to have a playlist for real estate agents. So I would love real estate agents to brag about their city and talk about why they should work with them. And I'm going to have a whole playlist for that too. That's through Buy Me a Coffee. There's a fee for it. But outside of that, I vet them out. I make sure that they're legit and they have good ratings and all of that stuff before I actually upload them and accept them into the program. I just want to help people move smarter. And I really think that moving sucks. And unless you're doing it for the right reasons and you're completely prepared, I think it's a really tough thing. So I want to make sure that you're in a good place when you move financially, mentally, physically, and I want you to go into a community that is going to keep you thriving and getting your dreams. So until next time, thanks.
Well, I could go on forever and ever about moving you closer to your dreams, but I probably should save some thoughts for the next episode. A big thanks goes out to you for making time for me today. And making time for me, you're making time for future you, and we're both grateful. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the podcast, download the episodes, and leave me a 5-star review. I would really appreciate it. In return, if you go to my website, mariette'sonthemove.com, and register for the Monday mailer, I'll send you a free Fred workbook to get your journey started. This is also where you can find all the show notes and all the ways to get in touch with me. A special thanks goes out to Rogue Media for its wisdom and partnership. Until next time, friends, keep moving forward towards your dreams. Oh, and the legal stuff. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I am a certified coach, not a licensed therapist, and this is not meant to replace the professional advice of a physician, psychotherapist, or other qualified professionals. This is solely my perspective based on my own experience and training. Okay, now it's over. For reals. Bye for now.
This has been a Rogue Media Network